The summer heat hit Margaret like a wall as she stepped out of Miller's pharmacy. At 78 years old, she had lived through many hot days, but this Tuesday afternoon felt different. The sun blazed down on the cracked sidewalk, making the air shimmer like water. Margaret clutched her small white paper bag close to her chest. Inside were the pills that kept her heart beating steady, and her blood pressure from climbing too high. The pharmacist had given her the news she dreaded hearing again. The price had gone up. Way up. $68, she whispered to herself, the number still echoing in her mind. Last month it was $45. The month before that, $32. She did the math in her head as she walked slowly down Maple Street. After paying for her medicine, she had exactly $12 left until her next Social Security check arrived in 2 weeks. $12 for food, for everything. Margaret's worn sneakers made soft sounds against the hot pavement. She moved carefully, the way old people do when they know one wrong step could mean a broken hip and months in the hospital. Her thin cotton dress stuck to her back, and tiny beads of sweat formed on her forehead despite the floppy sun hat she always wore. The street was busier than usual. Cars moved slowly through the neighborhood, their air conditioners humming. Margaret watched a young mother push a stroller quickly toward the shade of a large oak tree. Even the dogs seemed to be walking slower today, their tongues hanging out as their owners hurried them along. Margaret felt her chest tighten. Not the sharp pain that would send her to the emergency room, but the dull ache that reminded her she wasn't young anymore. Her heart worked harder in the heat. Her doctor had warned her about that. "Stay inside when it gets too hot, Margaret," Dr. Phillips had said during her last visit. "Your heart doesn't need the extra stress." But staying inside meant no groceries. It meant no picking up prescriptions. It meant being trapped in her small apartment with only the old window fan that barely moved the thick air around. She paused at the corner, waiting for the light to change. A group of teenagers sat on the steps of the old community center across the street. They were laughing about something, their voices carrying across the hot air. Margaret remembered when she was their age, when summer heat meant freedom and fun, not danger and worry. The light changed and Margaret stepped into the crosswalk. Halfway across, her vision started to blur around the edges. It was like looking through a dirty window that someone kept making cloudier and cloudier. She blinked hard, trying to clear her sight, but the fuzzy feeling only got worse. Her legs felt strange, like they belonged to someone else. Each step took more effort than it should. The $12 in her pocket seemed to get heavier with each movement forward. The prescription bag in her other hand felt like it weighed 20 pounds. Margaret knew this feeling. She had felt it once before, 3 years ago, when she forgot to eat breakfast and spent too long working in her small garden. But this time felt different, stronger, more frightening. She tried to reach for the lamppost at the corner, something to hold on to, until the dizzy spell passed. Her hand stretched out, her fingers almost touching the cool metal, but her legs gave out first. The world tilted sideways, and Margaret felt herself falling in slow motion. The hot concrete rushed up to meet her, and then everything went black. Jerome Williams was driving home from his son's basketball practice when he saw the woman fall. He had been talking to his wife Denise about stopping at the grocery store when something in his peripheral vision made him hit the brakes. "What is it?" Denise asked, looking up from her phone where she had been checking their shopping list. "Someone just collapsed," Jerome said, already pulling the car over to the side of the road. "Right there on the sidewalk." Their 12-year-old son, Danny, looked up from his game. "Is she okay, Dad?" Jerome was already getting out of the car. "Stay here with your mom for a second, okay?" But Denise was right behind him, and their 8-year-old daughter, Lucy, had already unbuckled her seatbelt. The Williams family didn't walk past people who needed help. It wasn't how they were raised, and it wasn't how they were raising their children. Margaret lay crumpled on the sidewalk like a broken doll. Her sun hat had fallen off, revealing thin gray hair that stuck to her damp forehead. The prescription bag had scattered its contents across the concrete, and Jerome could see several pill bottles that had rolled toward the gutter. "Ma'am?" Denise knelt down beside the elderly woman, her teacher instincts kicking in. She had dealt with children who fainted at school, usually from heat or not eating lunch. Can you hear me? Jerome pulled out his phone and dialed 911. I need an ambulance on Maple Street, he said to the operator. An elderly woman has collapsed. She's unconscious. Lucy stood nearby, her eyes wide with concern. Is the lady going to be okay, Mama? We're going to make sure she is, baby, Denise said softly, never taking her eyes off Margaret. She gently touched the woman's wrist, feeling for a pulse. It was there, but fast and weak. Danny had gotten out of the car despite his father's instructions and was carefully collecting the scattered pill bottles. He had always been responsible for his age, the kind of kid who helped without being asked. Dad, should I put these back in the bag? That's good thinking, son, Jerome said, finishing his call with the emergency operator. Just be careful not to mix them up. A small crowd was starting to gather. The teenagers from the community center had walked over to see what was happening. A man walking his dog stopped to ask if they needed help. An older woman from the nearby apartment building peeked out her window, then came outside. I think I know her, the woman said, approaching cautiously. That's Margaret Thompson. She lives in the building next to mine. Sweet lady, but she doesn't talk to many people. Jerome knelt down on Margaret's other side. Mrs. Thompson, can you hear us? Help is coming. Margaret's eyelids fluttered. Then slowly, very slowly, they opened. For a moment she looked confused, like she didn't know where she was or how she had gotten there. Her eyes moved from Jerome to Denise to the children standing nearby. What? She tried to speak, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. You fainted, ma'am, Denise explained gently. We're here to help you. An ambulance is on the way. Margaret tried to sit up, but Denise placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Just stay still for now. Let's wait for the paramedics to check you out. I can't afford... Margaret started to say, then stopped. Her cheeks turned red, but not from the heat. Jerome understood immediately. He had seen that look before, the shame of not having enough money for medical care. Don't worry about that. Right now, he said kindly. Let's just make sure you're okay first. In the distance, they could hear the sound of sirens getting closer. Margaret closed her eyes again, not from unconsciousness this time, but from embarrassment. She had become the thing she had always feared becoming, a burden, a problem for strangers to solve. But when she opened her eyes again and saw the genuine concern on the faces surrounding her, something inside her chest loosened. Not the tightness from the heat or her heart condition, but something else entirely. Something that had been clenched tight for a very long time. The ambulance arrived with flashing lights and the kind of urgent energy that made everyone step back. 2 paramedics jumped out, their heavy equipment bags bouncing as they hurried toward Margaret. She was sitting up now, leaning against Jerome's arm for support, but her face was still pale as paper. What's her name? Asked the older paramedic, a woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a ponytail. Margaret Thompson, Denise answered quickly. We think she fainted from the heat. She was unconscious for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. The paramedic knelt down and began checking Margaret's vital signs. Mrs. Thompson, I'm Linda. Can you tell me how you're feeling right now? Margaret's voice was stronger than before, but still shaky. I feel foolish mainly. All these people stopping their day because of me. Don't feel foolish, Linda said, wrapping a blood pressure cuff around Margaret's thin arm. Heat exhaustion is serious, especially for someone your age. When's the last time you ate something? Margaret had to think about it. Yesterday evening, I think. Maybe some crackers this morning with my coffee. Jerome and Denise exchanged a look. No wonder she had collapsed. The heat was bad enough, but going that long without food was dangerous for anyone, especially someone in their 70s. The second paramedic, a young man named Chris, was checking Margaret's blood sugar with a small device. It's pretty low, he told Linda quietly. We should get her to the hospital. No, Margaret said firmly, trying to stand up. I can't afford a hospital visit. Please, I just need to get home and rest. Linda gently but firmly kept Margaret seated. Mrs. Thompson, your blood pressure is elevated and your blood sugar is dangerously low. You need medical attention. How much will the ambulance cost? Margaret asked, and Jerome could hear the panic creeping into her voice. Ma'am, let's worry about getting you healthy first, Chris said kindly. There are programs that can help with the cost. But Margaret was shaking her head. You don't understand. I spent almost everything on my prescription today. I can't afford an ambulance and a hospital bill. The crowd that had gathered was listening, to every word. Some people looked uncomfortable, like they wanted to help but didn't know how. Others seemed surprised that someone could be in such financial trouble. Jerome made a decision. How much does an ambulance ride usually cost? Linda looked uncertain. It depends on the distance and the hospital, but usually between $300 and $500. I'll cover it, Jerome said simply. Margaret stared at him like he had just spoken a foreign language. What? No, I can't let you do that. I don't even know you. And we don't know you, Denise added gently. But that doesn't matter right now. What matters is making sure you're okay. Danny stepped forward, still holding Margaret's scattered pill bottles. Dad, can I give these to the ambulance people? I made sure all the labels are facing the right way so they can read them. Linda smiled at the boy. That's very helpful, young man, thank you. As she looked through the bottles, her expression grew more serious. Mrs. Thompson, these are heart medications. When's the last time you took them? This morning, Margaret replied. Well, I tried to. I've been rationing them because they're so expensive, taking them every other day instead of every day. You can't do that with heart medication, Linda said firmly but kindly. These need to be taken exactly as prescribed, or they can't protect your heart properly. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. But if I take them like I'm supposed to, I won't have money for food. And if I don't eat, I end up like this anyway. The horrible catch-22 of her situation hung in the air like the heat itself. Everyone could feel it, but nobody knew what to say. Lucy, who had been quietly listening to everything, tugged on her mother's dress. Mama, why doesn't the medicine lady have enough money for food and medicine? Denise knelt down to her daughter's level. Sometimes grown-ups have to make very hard choices, baby. Mrs. Thompson is on a fixed income, which means she gets the same amount of money every month, but everything keeps getting more expensive. That's not fair, Lucy said, her 8-year-old sense of justice clearly offended. No, it's not fair, Denise agreed. That's why we help when we can. Margaret wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I'm sorry you all have to see this. I used to be self-sufficient. I used to be able to take care of myself. You're still taking care of yourself, Jerome said. You went out in this heat to get your medicine because you knew you needed it. That takes courage. But look where it got me, Margaret said bitterly. Flat on my back on a sidewalk. It got you surrounded by people who want to help, Chris the paramedic pointed out. That's not nothing. Linda had finished her examination. Mrs. Thompson, I really think you should come to the hospital. Your heart rhythm is irregular, and with the medication issues and the dehydration, a doctor needs to see you. And I really think I can't afford it, Margaret replied stubbornly. Jerome had an idea. What if we drove you to the emergency room ourselves? Would that cost less than an ambulance? Linda considered this. It would save the ambulance fee, but she'd still have the emergency room charges. Plus, if something happened on the way, we'll follow right behind the ambulance, Denise suggested. That way, Mrs. Thompson gets proper medical transport, but she'll have people she knows at the hospital with her. Margaret looked confused. But you don't know me. Why would you spend your whole day at a hospital with a stranger? Danny spoke up. My teacher says we're all neighbors, even if we don't live next door to each other. And neighbors help neighbors. The simplicity of the child's logic seemed to hit Margaret harder than all the adult reasoning. She looked at this family who had appeared out of nowhere to help her, and something in her chest that had nothing to do with her heart condition began to crack open. I don't understand why you're doing this, she whispered. Jerome sat down on the curb next to her despite his good work clothes. Mrs. Thompson, 3 years ago, my mother fell and broke her hip. She was alone in a grocery store parking lot, in another state where we didn't know anybody. A family stopped and stayed with her until we could get there. They didn't know her from anybody, but they treated her like she was their own grandmother. He paused, remembering. Mom always said that was the day she learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about people who show up when you need them. Margaret was crying openly now, but they were different tears than before. Not tears of frustration or embarrassment, but something deeper. "I'll go to the hospital," she said quietly. "But I want to pay you back for the ambulance somehow." "We'll figure that out later," Denise said. "Right now, let's just focus on getting you feeling better." As the paramedics prepared to load Margaret into the ambulance, she grabbed Jerome's hand. "What's your name?" "I should at least know the name of the person helping me." "Jerome Williams. This is my wife Denise, and our kids Danny and Lucy." "Jerome," Margaret repeated, like she was memorizing it. "I'm Margaret Thompson, and I think you might just be angels." Lucy giggled. "We're not angels, Mrs. Margaret, we're just people." "Sometimes," Margaret said softly as they helped her onto the stretcher. "That's the same thing." The ambulance doors closed, but Jerome had already started his car. True to their word, the Williams family followed the flashing lights all the way to the hospital, where a scared old woman wouldn't have to face whatever came next alone. 3R. Emergency room was busy and cold, the complete opposite of the hot street where Margaret had collapsed just hours earlier. She sat on a narrow bed with wheels, wrapped in a thin hospital blanket that smelled like industrial detergent. The Williams family had claimed the two uncomfortable chairs in her small curtained area, making the cramped space feel less lonely. Dr. Martinez, a woman about Denise's age with tired eyes but a warm smile, had just finished examining Margaret. "Your blood work shows you're dehydrated, and your blood sugar was dangerously low when you arrived. The good news is your heart seems stable now that we've gotten some fluids and glucose into you." "So I can go home?" Margaret asked hopefully. "I'd like to keep you for observation for a few more hours," Dr. Martinez said. "But I'm more concerned about what happens when you do go home. The paramedics told me you've been rationing your heart medication?" Margaret's cheeks turned red again. She had hoped that embarrassing detail wouldn't follow her to the hospital. "They're just so expensive. I thought if I took them every other day, maybe they'd still work." "Mrs. Thompson, heart medications don't work that way. Your heart needs steady levels of these drugs to stay healthy. Taking them sporadically is almost as dangerous as not taking them at all." Jerome leaned forward in his chair. "What would happen if she keeps doing what she's been doing?" Dr. Martinez didn't sugarcoat it. "Another collapse like today, but next time it might be a heart attack or stroke. At Mrs. Thompson's age, that could be fatal." The words hung heavy in the small space. Margaret closed her eyes, feeling the weight of an impossible choice pressing down on her chest again. "There has to be something we can do," Denise said firmly. "Some kind of assistance program or—" "There are programs," Dr. Martinez agreed, "but they can take weeks to process applications, and Mrs. Thompson needs her medication consistently starting now." Danny had been quietly listening to everything, the way kids do when adults think they're not paying attention. "How much do her medicines cost every month?" Dr. Martinez checked Margaret's chart. "Based on what she's taking, probably around $250. Danny's eyes went wide. That was more money than he had ever seen at one time. But Jerome was already doing math in his head, the same math Margaret had been doing for months. Fixed income versus rising costs. Basic needs versus life-saving medication. "Mrs. Thompson," Jerome said carefully, "what's your living situation like? Do you have family nearby?" Margaret shook her head. "My husband died 5 years ago. We never had children. My sister lives in Florida, but we haven't spoken in years." She paused, then added quietly, "I've been on my own for a while now." "Where do you live?" Denise asked. "Sunset Apartments, about 6 blocks from where you found me. It's nothing fancy, but it's affordable. Or it was affordable until everything else got so expensive." Lucy had been coloring on the back of a hospital pamphlet with a pen nurse Jennifer had given her. She looked up suddenly. "Mrs. Margaret, do you have enough food at home?" The question was so direct and innocent that Margaret didn't think to give anything but an honest answer. "Not really. Sweetheart, I have some crackers and a can of soup, I think." "That's not enough food," Lucy said matter-of-factly. "People need breakfast and lunch and dinner every day, that's what my mom says." Denise felt her heart break a little more. Lucy's right. Mrs. Thompson, when's the last time you had a real meal? Margaret had to think about it, which was answer enough. I've been trying to make things stretch, eating one meal a day, sometimes less. No wonder you collapsed, Jerome said. Your body was running on empty. Dr. Martinez had been listening to this conversation with growing concern. Mrs. Thompson, malnutrition combined with medication non-compliance is a recipe for disaster. You're going to end up back here, and next time might be much worse. But what choice do I have? Margaret asked, and for the first time since they'd met her, she sounded angry instead of just defeated. Do you think I want to live like this? Do you think I enjoy choosing between food and medicine? I worked for 43 years. I paid into Social Security. I saved what I could. But my husband's medical bills used up our savings, and now everything costs more, but my check stays the same. The family sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the reality of Margaret's situation. It wasn't that she was making bad choices or being irresponsible. She was trapped in a system that forced impossible decisions on people who had done everything right their whole lives. Danny spoke up again. Dad, remember when our neighbor Mr. Peterson couldn't afford to fix his roof after that storm? And how the whole street got together to help him? Jerome smiled at his son's memory. I remember. Well, couldn't we do something like that for Mrs. Margaret? Before Jerome could answer, Margaret was shaking her head. Oh no, I couldn't accept charity from you people. You've already done too much. It's not charity, Danny said with the logic only children possess. It's neighbors helping neighbors, remember? Like I told you before. But I'm not your neighbor, Margaret protested. I live 6 blocks away. Mrs. Margaret, Lucy said, setting down her makeshift coloring. My daddy says that neighbors aren't just people who live next door. Neighbors are people who care about each other. Denise looked at her daughter with pride. At 8 years old, Lucy had just defined community better than most adults could. She's right, Jerome said. Mrs. Thompson, you don't have to face this alone. But I don't understand why you want to help me, Margaret said, her voice breaking. I'm nobody special. I'm just an old woman who can't take care of herself anymore. Denise reached over and took Margaret's hand. You're wrong about that. You're someone's neighbor. You're someone who worked for over 40 years and deserves to live with dignity. You're someone who matters. Margaret started crying again, but this time Jerome noticed they seemed like different tears. Maybe tears of relief instead of despair. Dr. Martinez had been watching this interaction with interest. Mrs. Thompson, I'm going to discharge you in about an hour, but I want you to promise me you'll take your medications as prescribed from now on. I'll try, Margaret said weakly. No trying, Jerome said firmly but kindly. We're going to make sure you have what you need. How? Margaret asked. Jerome looked at his wife and Denise nodded slightly. They were having one of those wordless conversations that married couples have, where whole decisions get made in a single glance. We're going to start by taking you home and making sure you have groceries, Denise said. Real groceries, not just crackers and soup. And then we're going to sit down and figure out a plan for your medications, Jerome added. But I can't pay you back, Margaret protested. Nobody asked you to, Jerome said simply. Danny had been quiet for a few minutes, but now he looked excited about something. Dad, what if Mrs. Margaret could teach me and Lucy stuff, like how to garden or cook old-fashioned recipes? Then it wouldn't be just us helping her, she'd be helping us too. Margaret looked surprised. You'd want to learn those things? Are you kidding? Lucy said enthusiastically. I love cooking, and Danny's always talking about wanting to grow vegetables. For the first time since they'd met her, Margaret smiled. Really smiled, not just the polite smile she'd been giving them. I do know how to grow a good tomato, and I make a mean apple pie from scratch. See? Danny said triumphantly. It's not charity if we're both helping each other. Margaret looked around at this family who had appeared in her life like something out of a story. A few hours ago, she had been alone and struggling. Now she was surrounded by people who seemed genuinely interested in making sure she was okay. I don't know what I did to deserve meeting you all, she said softly. You didn't have to do anything, Denise replied. Sometimes good things just happen, sometimes people just care. Margaret squeezed Denise's hand. I think I'm beginning to understand that. Margaret's apartment was nothing like what the Williams family had expected. They had imagined something run-down or depressing, but instead they found a cozy space, filled with life. Plants lined every windowsill, their green leaves reaching toward the afternoon sun, handmade quilts draped over a well-worn sofa, and the walls were covered with black and white photographs of people from another era. "Oh my goodness," Denise said, stopping in front of a gallery wall near the kitchen. "Did you take these pictures?" Margaret nodded, a hint of pride creeping into her voice. "Photography was my hobby for 50 years. That's my husband Robert in the center photo, taken on our wedding day." Danny studied the images carefully. "These are really good, like museum good." "Thank you, sweetheart. I developed them all myself back when people still used film." Margaret moved slowly toward her tiny kitchen, still weak from the day's events. "I used to have a darkroom set up in the basement of our old house." Jerome was looking at her small balcony, where dozens of tomato plants grew in carefully arranged containers. "You weren't kidding about knowing how to grow tomatoes. This is incredible." "The apartment doesn't allow gardens, but they can't stop me from container gardening on my own balcony," Margaret said with a small smile. "Those plants have given me more tomatoes than I can eat this summer." Lucy pressed her nose to the sliding glass door. "They're so big and red. Can we pick some?" "Of course, honey. Take as many as you want." But when Denise opened Margaret's refrigerator to put away the groceries they had bought on the way over, her heart sank. Despite Margaret's generous offer to share her tomatoes, the refrigerator contained exactly what Margaret had said earlier: a can of soup, a sleeve of crackers, and a carton of milk that was 3 days past its expiration date. "Mrs. Thompson," Denise said gently, "when did you last go grocery shopping?" Margaret's cheeks turned pink. "Real grocery shopping? Not just picking up 1 or 2 things, maybe 3 weeks ago." Jerome joined them in the kitchen and saw what Denise had discovered. Without saying anything, he began unpacking the bags they had brought. Fresh vegetables, bread, milk, eggs, chicken, rice, and other basics filled the small refrigerator and counters. "This is too much," Margaret protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "I can't accept all this food. Consider it payment in advance for gardening lessons," Danny said cleverly. "And cooking lessons. And photography lessons if you're willing to teach those too." Margaret looked surprised. "You want to learn photography? Are you kidding? You could teach us how to take pictures like those on your wall, and maybe how to develop them the old-fashioned way." "I don't have a darkroom anymore," Margaret said sadly. "When I moved here, I had to sell most of my equipment." Jerome had an idea. "What if we set up a little darkroom in your bathroom? Nothing permanent, just something we could put up and take down when you need to use it." Margaret's eyes lit up in a way they hadn't since the family had met her. "Do you really think that would work?" "Dad's really good at building things," Lucy said proudly. "He built me a treehouse last summer and Danny's bookshelf, and he fixed Mrs. Patterson's fence after the big windstorm." "What do you do for work, Jerome?" Margaret asked. "I'm a carpenter. Been building and fixing things for 20 years. Margaret sat down heavily in her kitchen chair, overwhelmed. "I don't understand how all this is happening. This morning I woke up alone, worried about money, rationing my pills. Now I have a refrigerator full of food and people talking about building me a darkroom." Denise sat across from her. "Sometimes life changes fast. Sometimes help comes from places you never expected." "But why are you doing this for me?" Margaret asked for what felt like the 100th time. "I still don't understand." Danny, who had been examining Margaret's old camera equipment on a shelf, turned around. "Mrs. Margaret, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. When you were young, did you help people sometimes?" Margaret thought about it. "Yes, I suppose I did. Robert and I used to help our neighbors quite a bit. When someone was sick or needed help moving or had a baby." "Did you help them because you wanted something back?" "No, we helped because it was the right thing to do." Danny nodded like Margaret had just proved his point. "That's what we're doing too." The simplicity of it seemed to finally get through to Margaret. Her eyes filled with tears again, but Jerome was learning to recognize the different types of tears Margaret cried. These were good tears. "You know, Margaret said slowly. I haven't had people in this apartment for over 2 years. I forgot how nice it feels to have voices and laughter in these rooms. Lucy had been exploring Margaret's bookshelf and found a photo album. Mrs. Margaret, can you tell us about these pictures? Margaret's face brightened as Lucy climbed onto the sofa beside her with the heavy album. Oh my, I haven't looked at these in ages. That's me and Robert on our honeymoon. We drove all the way to the Grand Canyon in his old Ford pickup truck. As Margaret began telling stories about the photos, Denise and Jerome found themselves drawn into tales of a different time. Margaret had lived an interesting life. She had been a secretary at the local newspaper, Robert had worked at the steel mill, and together they had traveled to all 50 states over the course of their marriage. What was your favorite place? Danny asked. Montana, Margaret said without hesitation. We went there for our 30th anniversary. The mountains were so big they made you feel small, but in a good way, like you were part of something much bigger than yourself. Do you miss traveling? Denise asked. Margaret nodded. I miss a lot of things about being younger, but mostly I miss having someone to share experiences with. Food tastes better when you're eating with someone else. Sunsets are prettier when someone else is watching them with you. Jerome looked around the apartment again, seeing it differently now. It wasn't just a place where a lonely old woman was struggling to survive. It was a home full of memories, creativity, and knowledge. Margaret wasn't just someone who needed help, she was someone who had a lot to offer. Mrs. Thompson, he said, what if we made a deal? What kind of deal? What if our families became, I don't know what to call it, extended family maybe? We help you with groceries and medications and anything else you need. You teach our kids about gardening and photography and cooking and whatever else you know. We all spend time together regularly like families do. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. You mean like adopted grandparents and grandchildren? Exactly like that, Denise said warmly. But what about? Margaret gestured vaguely, and Jerome knew she was thinking about race, about the differences between their families that some people might not understand. Mrs. Thompson, Jerome said gently, family isn't about what people look like. It's about who shows up for each other. Margaret looked around at the Williams family, Jerome with his kind eyes and gentle strength, Denise with her teacher's patience, and warm heart Danny with his thoughtful questions and mature insight, and Lucy with her innocent wisdom and bright spirit. I would like that very much, she said quietly. I would like that more than anything. Lucy clapped her hands together. Does this mean we can call you Grandma Margaret? Margaret's smile was brighter than any of the photographs on her walls. I think I would love that, Lucy. I think that would make me very happy. And for the first time in 5 years, Margaret Thompson didn't feel alone. 6 months later, Margaret stood in her kitchen preparing apple pie filling for Thanksgiving dinner. The same kitchen that had once held only crackers and expired milk, now buzzed with activity. Danny was carefully measuring flour for the pie crust, following Margaret's handwritten recipe that she had learned from her own grandmother 60 years ago. Remember, sweetheart, Margaret said, guiding his hands as he cut butter into the flour. The secret to good pie crust is keeping everything cold and not overworking the dough. Like this? Danny asked, his tongue poking out slightly in concentration. Perfect. You're a natural baker. Lucy burst through the front door, her arms full of flowers she had picked from the community garden that Jerome had helped Margaret start behind the apartment building. Grandma Margaret, look what bloomed today. Margaret's heart still skipped a little every time the children called her Grandma. After months of hearing it, the name felt as natural as breathing, but the joy it brought never got old. Those are beautiful, Lucy. Put them in the blue vase on the dining table. Your parents will be here soon with the turkey. The apartment looked completely different than it had 6 months ago, not because of any major changes, but because it was alive again. Jerome had indeed figured out how to set up a temporary dark room in Margaret's bathroom, and her photography had become a neighborhood sensation. Her black and white portraits of local children and families now hung in the community center, and she had even sold a few to help with expenses. The container garden on the balcony had expanded to include herbs and flowers thanks to Danny's enthusiasm and natural green thumb. Margaret had been teaching him about soil composition and plant nutrition, and he soaked up every bit of knowledge like a sponge. Most importantly, Margaret's medicine cabinet now stayed properly stocked. The Williams family had connected her with a social worker who helped her apply for prescription assistance programs, and what those programs didn't cover, the extended family network they had built, made sure she had. The sound of keys in the door announced Jerome and Denise's arrival, their arms loaded with grocery bags and covered dishes. "Something smells incredible in here," Jerome called out, setting bags on the counter. "That's the apple pie," Margaret said proudly. "Danny made the crust all by himself." "I did most of it," Danny corrected with characteristic honesty. "Grandma." Margaret helped with the tricky parts. Denise hugged Margaret warmly, a gesture that had become as natural as family hugs should be. "How are you feeling today? Did you remember to take your morning pills?" "Yes, Mother Hen," Margaret teased. "I took them with breakfast just like every day for the past 6 months." The transformation in Margaret's health had been remarkable. Regular meals, consistent medication, and having people to live for had given her energy she hadn't felt in years. Her doctor had been amazed at her last checkup. "Mrs. Patterson called," Jerome said, unpacking groceries. "She wants to know if you can take family portraits for her daughter's wedding next month." Margaret beamed. "Really? That's wonderful. I haven't photographed a wedding in 20 years. Lucy was arranging her flowers when she suddenly looked thoughtful. "Grandma Margaret, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. Are you still sad sometimes like you were before we met you?" It was the kind of question only children ask, direct and honest and impossible to avoid. Margaret sat down at the kitchen table and patted her lap. Lucy immediately climbed up, settling against Margaret's shoulder like she had been doing it her whole life. "I still get sad sometimes," Margaret said honestly. "I still miss Grandpa Robert, and I still worry about money sometimes. But it's different now." "Different how?" "Well, when I was sad before, I was sad alone. Now when I'm sad, I have people who care about me. And that makes the sadness smaller and shorter." Danny looked up from his pie crust. "Is that why my mom says that sharing problems makes them smaller, but sharing happiness makes it bigger?" "Your mom is a very smart woman," Margaret said. "That's exactly right." Jerome was setting up Margaret's small dining table with extra chairs they had brought from their house. The table that had sat empty for years would soon be surrounded by family. "Margaret," Jerome said, "I have something to tell you." The serious tone in his voice made everyone look up. "Is everything okay?" Margaret asked, worry creeping into her voice. 6 months ago, she would have immediately assumed the worst, that they were moving away or getting tired of helping her, or that something terrible was happening. "Everything's fine," Jerome assured her quickly. "Actually, everything's better than fine. You know how I've been talking about starting my own construction business instead of working for someone else?" Margaret nodded. Jerome had mentioned his dream of being his own boss several times over the past few months. "Well, I finally saved up enough money to get started. But more than that, I got the confidence to try because of you." "Because of me?" Margaret was confused. "I don't know anything about construction." "No, but you taught me something more important. You taught me that it's never too late to start over. Here you are, 78 years old, learning new recipes from Denise, teaching photography classes at the community center, making new friends. If you can reinvent your life at 78, I can start a business at 42. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, the happy kind that everyone had learned to recognize. "Plus," Denise added with a grin, "Margaret's photographs of Jerome's work are going to be the best business portfolio any contractor has ever had." "You're going to use my pictures for your business?" Margaret asked. "If you'll let us," Jerome said. "Your photographs make everything look like art, even kitchen cabinets and bathroom renovations." Lucy clapped her hands. "This means we're all helping each other, just like Danny said that first day." Margaret looked around her apartment, filled with the people who had become her family, and marveled at how much life could change. 6 months ago, she had collapsed on a hot sidewalk alone and afraid. Today, she was surrounded by love, contributing to her community, and looking forward to tomorrow. "You know," she said softly, I spent the first 78 years of my life thinking I knew what family meant. I thought it was just about blood and marriage and growing up in the same house. She paused, looking at each member of her chosen family. But I was wrong. Family is about people who show up when you fall down. Family is about people who see your worth when you can't see it yourself. Family is about people who let you help them as much as they help you. Danny had finished his pie crust and was carefully placing it in the pie pan. So we're all family now? Forever? Forever and always, Margaret said firmly. Blood or no blood, you're stuck with me now. Good, Lucy said contentedly, still snuggled in Margaret's lap. I like being stuck with you. As they finished preparing Thanksgiving dinner together, Margaret thought about gratitude. She was grateful for her health, for her apartment, for having enough food and medicine. But mostly, she was grateful for learning that family isn't something you're born into. It's something you choose to build, one act of kindness at a time. The timer rang, signaling that the turkey was ready. As Jerome carved and Denise served and the children chattered about their week, Margaret smiled. Her table was full, her heart was full, and her life, which had seemed over just 6 months ago, was just beginning again. Sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones you never saw coming.